The third part is intersecting those two, right? Is understanding where all of you, all of your potential anecdotes, all of your life stories intersect with that feeling that we want to create in our audience. And so you do that by, there's a whole framework that I teach in my program. But basically what we were doing is we're story banking.
Today, I am very excited to be joined by Mariana Henninger. If you don't know who Mariana is, she is a marketing strategist that specializes in emotional storytelling via video. She's founder of Brand Magnetic, a company that helps founders share their unique stories, build trust faster, and increase conversions. And her course is the Brand Video System. Her podcast is Empire Secrets. Mariana, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
So cool, Michael. Great to be here. Thanks.
I am super excited to have you here today. We're going to explore how to create brand videos. But before we go there, I'd love to hear your story. How'd you get into video? Start wherever you want to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing video for a very long time, about 15 years as a documentary filmmaker. I have an Emmy Award, 2 nominations. I've kind of worked with the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine. I've been on homepages, NBC for about 5 years. But I started as a lowly journalism student at one point, started in photography. Actually, I kind of knew I was attracted to visuals, and photography seemed to be my entry point. My first kind of gig was living in a hostel in Jerusalem, just outside the old city, and pitching editors every day, going around the city looking for stories. And then eventually I realized that as much as I loved photography, there was always something missing at the end of a project where, I documented people, and that was their voice. And I actually had this fun story, which is I was sitting down thinking, how could I make this more about them and less about my caption, right? To lean on them to tell their own story. And I was like, oh man, I wish I could combine their voices. And then I realized, wow, that's video. It's already been invented. And so that was my pivot to video. And again, as 15 years working in journalism and making short documentaries, I've also worked with a lot of brands like Microsoft and Hulu and Wells Fargo. And I've always been kind of a closeted entrepreneur. And so when I decided if not now, when am I actually going to own my own business and build a thing that I truly love without having to ask permission, all the things that we're drawn to in entrepreneurship, I had that deep inside of me. And that was, a year and a half ago when I decided this is the time. I'm going to look at the marketplace and see where my skill sets can serve people the most. And I realized, Michael, that, in the world of digital marketing, everyone's kind of doing the same thing where they're posting constantly on social media. They're showing up all the time. They're doing lead magnets. And then once I was signing up for those, the algorithm figured me out very quickly. And I realized that once I signed up for the lead magnet or got into somebody's universe or started following them on social, I could not for the heck of me remember who they were. And I think this happens to a lot of us where we sign up for things, especially in the beginning, right? Where we're just like, oh my gosh, this is useful, this is useful, this is useful. And we can't remember who people are. And that's the world that we're sort of taught is sort of, this is the game of digital marketing nowadays, where you're competing for attention and you're hoping that people remember who you are once you start that welcome sequence or once you hit them up over and over again. So we do it by continuity and by consistency and showing up. And I was like, wait, why aren't these people actually connecting with me as a human? Like that one magical moment when we make that first connection is just not being maximized. And I felt like, wow, I know how to tell stories in my sleep. I can do this, I know how to do this effectively to get people. In fact, like a short documentary I worked on was played in Congress and changed law in this country. And there really are ways to really maximize that personal, intimate connection from the get-go. And that's why I decided to specialize in brand videos and create Brand Magnetic.
Very cool. I want to go back to a little bit of your story. You started your business less than 2 years ago. Before that, you were creating videos. Just help people understand the kinds of videos you were creating when you were working with traditional media, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. So, I was always in news organizations, except for those moments where I worked in branded content. That's kind of how it's dubbed. And what we would do for all of these organizations, really, I think the through line for me personally in my career was that we would take things that were being talked about in the news. So like big news stories. And then I would look for what is that person that can help move people emotionally to care about this story and to see it in a different light. The reason I'm drawn to documentaries, for me, a good documentary is one where I've watched it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this person's life, this person's world, these subjects, this thing that we're learning about in this way. And I feel like I'm in their shoes now. I feel like I feel their pain. And this is why like docuseries have had a huge, resurgence. Like people are obsessed with, I'm going to follow this. This is binge worthy because now I feel it through their eyes. And I've never, I'm thinking about the Dallas Cowboys. I recently binged on that. I think it's really about seeing the world through somebody else's eyes, caring so much more about them, creating that connection that wasn't there before. And so again, it's just taking a big story and seeing like, how can I make people really see this in a very personal way and relate to it? And most importantly, care about it more.
Awesome. Okay. Let's define what the heck a brand video is. And then let's talk about why should marketers actually care about creating one. So let's start just by defining what it is, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So far we've talked about, journalism and world events. So what does that mean for us and what is a brand video? So the way that I define a brand video, this is not a term that I created, but I think people have, slightly different visions for it. When I see other people's brand videos, a lot of times it just doesn't connect with me emotionally. It's like, okay, I see it, I hear it, I get the information, but I'm not connected to that person. And so what I really look to do in a 2 to 4 minute video is to tell the story of who that person is, who you are, in a way that emotionally connects with your audience. And that makes you be seen as their person, or maybe not, right? And that's also a really good thing that we should do in marketing is like, if I'm not for you, it's okay, move on. But if I am for you, you can know that immediately by watching this one video. It lives top of funnel, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but it lives in certain places distributed throughout your funnel so that every single person who's hooked by maybe a comment that you made on a Facebook group or a post that you had, typically people are hooked by value, right? Like, oh, I learned something, I'm interested, I'm intrigued. And then what do they do next, right? They go to that person's profile, they find them on LinkedIn or on Instagram. They do a little bit of research like, wait, who is this person? That is actually very important. Let me repeat myself. As soon as somebody is hooked by something that they see about you, the very next question they're asking that we're not answering, but this is what we want to do with a brand video is, who is this person? Who is this person behind this offer? Who is this person behind this thing I just saw? And this is why the About Me page on your website is the second most visited page on a typical website. People want to know who you are. And the brand video helps not only can create that personal emotional connection, but highlight your values, your personality, and your mission. Those are the 3 things that we want to embody in this short video.
Keep going. Yeah. Values.
Keep going. Yeah.
Values, personality, and vision. I'm typing literally as we talk.
Yeah. Mission, right? Which is like why you do what you do. So a brand video is very different from any sort of other marketing video. It's not an explainer about your business. It's not related to any of your offers. This is actually super important. It's very evergreen unless you really pivot who you're serving or what you're doing in your business. I always kid, like, unless you change who your avatar is, or you dye your hair purple, your brand video can live on for years. It's the single piece of content that will have the most ROI in your business because you can use it top of funnel. Every single person who you connect with online, think about this, every single person who connects with your brand should see your brand video. And that is immediately going to create this real estate in their minds for who you are. They might not be ready to buy from you, right? There's a really common problem in our business, which is not everyone's ready to buy from us. And there's what we call leaky bucket, right? People, we spend all this money on ads, we show up consistently, people sign up, but they're not ready to buy. So they fall off your email list, they unsubscribe, they stop paying attention, they can't remember who the heck you are. And so what the brand video does is immediately create that relationship between you and them where they see you as a trusted friend who's an expert. right? So we're not placing you in the friend zone. You're still, but we're also not placing you in this pedestal of authority and expertise. We're making you that expert who's relatable and who, most importantly, Michael, cares about you and gets you. Those are the two sort of fundamental things in your brand video across the board. People should feel that you get them and that you care about them. Because even though it's your story, it's still about what's in it for your audience. It's the entire brand video is crafted with your audience at heart.
Okay, a couple thoughts. When my audience hears the word brand, they think big business. But sometimes branding is also like personal branding, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it seems to me as if this would be ideal for anyone who's like an author, coach, consultant, agency owner. But what about those marketers who work for a business where they don't own it? Is this like the CEO of the company in those kind of cases? Help me understand for the audiences that are not like listening, that are not the thought leader inside the business, why this might be important for their boss or someone else inside their company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all companies have some sort of personalization, right? So even, Apple, they did that Apple guy and the Microsoft guy in those commercials back then. Right. A lot of companies have mascots. Ideally, you want to have a human face. That's my personal preference. I think people connect with people for a reason. I mean, the Olympics had that. Everyone has either a mascot or we're trying to humanize the brand, right? And so ideally, you're doing that with the founder whose passion, whose values resonate throughout that brand. And maybe I don't use the word brand. Maybe you think of it, whatever business you have. It can be a brick and mortar. You can be selling a product. At the end of the day, we care about the person behind the brand, because that is what's going to, people buy more and they buy faster when they align with the values of the person behind the brand. And so whatever the case may be, I think there's no, one size fits all. Again, if you're not a coach or a course, if you're not the face of your brand, then it might be the CEO, it might be the founder. You kind of have to see which story makes the most sense for people to connect with.
Okay, I would love to dive into kind of how we go about doing this. But before I do, is there anything else that you wanted to mention that we haven't already mentioned?
I think one thing is important to think about is it's all about building trust faster. We know that it takes know, like, and trust to buy from someone. And we've just accepted that it takes 6 to 12 months on social media. Like, this was a stat that I read recently. It takes 6 to 12 months of posting consistently to see results. And I think that's insane. I think that's incredible because, first of all, it's a disservice to your audience. Like, people want solutions faster, right? And so if you are what I call microdosing them with who you are all along your value content, right? I think we've gone from an extreme of, maybe 5-10 years ago where we talked so much about how awesome we are, right? You would go on a website where like, we're the best. And now we're kind of gone all the way to the other extreme where it's like, it's all about you and your problems and your solutions. And I think now we're starting to all sound the same in that we're all talking about our audience. And at the end of the day, our audience is having to have the hard work of piecing together who we are. So we're microdosing them because we're not really telling that story. And I also think it's important to consider that, this is your brand video is one piece of content. It's not that you are going to constantly talk about yourself from here on out. I think once you establish that relationship, that with that connection, then you can go back to like, hey, this is how I can help you. This is the expertise. This is how we do it. But people want to know that you're the person that's going to get them the results that they want, that the results that you're promising. They want to know that you're the one who they want to take that journey with.
So what I'm hearing you say is that when you create a video like we're about to kind of explore and teach people through the rest of this interview, when you do this right, you're going to make an emotional connection with the right audience because they're going to connect to your story. B, you're going to speed the time it takes to move them from consideration to ultimately wanting to potentially work with you, right? And C, you're going to have a piece of content that you could use for years rather than having to create every day original new content, right? So this is a strong value proposition I'd love to dig in now on like, where do we start? What's the first part of your methodology?
Yeah, absolutely. So we start with them. We always start with your audience first. Like, no good marketing is not going to do that. By the way, I think across the board, it really is what's in it for them. How are you going to meet them where they are? And it starts with knowing them deeply. And what that means is knowing exactly and very deeply. So this is where you cannot do enough market research. You should be consistently talking to your customers all the time and really understanding what is the core of the problem that you're solving. What does that actually mean for them? So, if let's say they want, a lot of folks say, oh, I want to do this faster, or I want to get results faster. But ultimately, what's at the core of that is that they want to spend more time with their family, or they want to live life differently. They don't want to be a slave to that problem. And so that's just an example, right? Before you start there, actually, there are two types of stories, Michael. There's an overcome story and there's a passion story. It's really important for you to understand which story you have, because that's kind of going to dictate the framework that you're going to use when you're ready to tell that story. Like the process is the same, the steps are the same, but the framework that you use to sort of craft that story, and more specifically, which story you tell, is going to be dictated by the kind of story that you have. And so the overcome story are typically, coaches would fall into that category. Anytime you've had a challenge that you have overcome yourself and you help your audience overcome that same challenge, you have an overcome story. So for example, I have a client, Casey, who helps women who are sober curious change their relationship with alcohol. And she had a similar story. She was a high achiever. She didn't resonate with AA, and a lot of her clients don't either. Like, they don't see themselves as alcoholics, but they realize that alcohol is keeping them from having a better life. And so, and I'll use her example, her story, and a few other of the other steps, because it was so interesting to see when we started picking out which parts of her story to tell. And so that's an overcome story. A passion story is when you're talking to an audience where your stories are not exactly parallel. So I fall into that category because I don't speak to filmmakers, right? I don't talk about how to build a career in filmmaking or in documentaries. That's not my audience. So I lean on my why. Like, why is it that I'm passionate about what I do? And I get a few questions from my students where they're like, well, I'm passionate too. Everyone's passionate, right? And you should be passionate about your business. So they're both passion stories, but you either have overcome something that's similar, or you're leaning on your why and the passion for what you do. And so
Okay,
that first,
this is really good. So, all right. So it's important to know that there's two kinds of stories you could choose to tell: the overcome story. And as a copywriter, I can tell you there's probably a lot of things you've overcome and you probably don't even remember. You probably just need to like go back in your archives and imagine what you've overcome. But in this particular case, I'm hearing the distinction here isn't that you're an overcomer. It's that you're an overcomer who's helping people overcome the same thing. That's the
absolutely,
key
yeah.
part of the distinction, right? And if you're not in, you might be a rags to riches or whatever kind of story, but if that's not what you're helping other people do, then probably you ought to go to the passion side, right? And for the passion side, well, then you could share why you're passionate, which might be because you've overcome adversity in your life or something, right? That allows you, or whatever. But with the passion side of it, like, what makes that one different than overcome? That's where I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're leaning into, we'll get to this point in the second step, which is what makes you unique.
Right.
So first of all, you know your audience deeply. You know them super well. You know what words they use. This is obviously a principle of copywriting across the board.
Right.
You know how they use the words to describe themselves and the position that they're in, and you're going to mimic that when you get to the point of writing your story. The second step is knowing yourself.
Before we go into the second step, just help distinguish passion from overcome, just so
well,
understand that.
It's a little bit clear in the second step.
All right, perfect.
Yeah,
all right,
because you're understanding, Michael, the second step, you have to understand what makes people connect with you, what makes people trust you. That's actually one of the overarching questions that we ask when we start your brand video. What does trust feel like for them? What does it take for your audience to trust you, and really understand what that trust looks like? What do they need to feel in order to be ready to buy from you? Because keep in mind, just like you said, we're accelerating that process of building trust by getting them to the point of where they need to feel when they're ready to buy from you. And so when we're digging into who you are, this is where the passion story really comes into play, because you're understanding what parts of your personality, what parts of your system, of the way that you are, that comes into play so much more when you have a passion story. So I'll give you an example. I have a student from my brand video system program who her name is Julia. She's called the podcast teacher. And at the time she didn't have a podcast, but she helped entrepreneurs start their podcast. So she had a lot of production background. And so we couldn't use the story of how she started her own podcast. We had to lean really heavily on why her students loved her. Why did they come to Julia to learn about podcasting? Well, that's because this girl has an amazing love of systems. She had, so we started unearthing the stories that could tell that, right? And so in her brand video, she talks about how when she was a little girl, she used to put markers in rainbow order, and she loves jigsaw puzzles. Well, then you start thinking, well, jigsaw puzzles, that's an amazing way to take something that's jumbled up and doesn't make any sense, and then build it into something that's a roadmap, or that's beautifully completed, right? And so this is what they loved about Julia. And so when you have a passion story, those are the types of anecdotes or elements that you're going to look for to bring to life. What does your audience, what do your customers love about Michael? And how do I bring that to the surface with really interesting, beautiful, compelling stories? So maybe in the passion story, you tend to have like a combination of anecdotes that sort of build upon each other, whereas an overcome story sort of follows the traditional route. I have a very simple storytelling framework, which is old normal, something happens, there's a turning point, and then you have a new normal, and you pivot to your mission at the end of your brand video. So you do lead people to a certain place, but it's not a call to action. But does that difference make a bit more sense?
Yeah, totally. So just to be clear, we've talked about the first step is understanding your audience deeply and kind of deciding which path you want to go down, overcome or passion. The second step really is knowing you,
yes,
right? Or whoever's going to be the subject in the video. And you talked about how it's really important to kind of understand from others, what is it about that person or me that makes me unique? Do you have any other tips on how I can, because it's really hard. It's easy.
It is hard, yeah.
When you're a storyteller, it's really easy for you to tell someone else's story, but how do I know what's unique about me? Like any more tips on how to like actually get to that?
Absolutely, Michael. You know, the way that I describe it is like, you can be the best surgeon in the world, but doing surgery on yourself is going to be really difficult.
That's
and
right.
so,
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. It's super hard to do this for yourself. The best way to do that is, again, by talking to your audience and specifically talking to your customers. And so there are actually several different points in which you should be talking to your customers. A really important point that I really don't think we talk enough about is speaking to your customer the moment that they buy from you. And that's where you're going to get the truest description, the truest, revelation of what made them buy from you. What was it about your story? What was it about you? These are the questions you ask, by the way. What was it about me that made you buy from me? What struck you? What made you click, right? Both figuratively and literally on the buy button. And then we also want to talk to our clients who have worked with us and who can tell us, what is it about working with me that you loved? What is it about my personality? What made you choose me over anyone else? That's what's going to get you the best answer to that. And, we were talking about this earlier. You can ask your friends, you can ask your family, but they're going to have kind of a distorted view of that. You might have a distorted view of yourself, of what your audience connects with. It really is about what they're connecting with, even more than what you think you're about. That said, you want to keep in mind that your brand video is also going to reflect your values. It's a very curated way to tell your story. So it doesn't mean you're not being authentic. It just means that for this moment where you're connecting with them, top of funnel, when they haven't gotten to know you over time, you're being very curated, very specific, very intentional about how you're connecting with them and what are the feelings that we want them to have at the end of watching this video.
Talk to me about the feelings part because, like, how do we even know what kind of feelings we want someone to have,
That's a great question.
And this is a guy that doesn't have a lot of feelings, so I'm speaking on behalf of, other than anger. So what kind of feelings do we want?
I think you bring up a really good point, by the way, Michael. I think people buy in all sorts of different ways. There are people who buy a lot more based on logic, like,
right.
Give me your results, give me the numbers, like what is your track record? That's enough. Boom, I bought.
Yeah.
I also talk about the leaky toilet in the middle of the night. That's a situation where who cares about how you feel? You need the plumber who can get there the fastest, right?
Right.
But for the most part, and maybe I speak a little bit more for the female demographic, well, I think
the majority of my audience, by the way.
Yes. Hi, women out there. Truly, we buy a lot of things. If not, honestly, I think it even if you say you're not emotional, there are emotions involved. In fact, there's a Harvard Business School study that says that 95% of purchasing decisions are based on subconscious or emotional connection, right? And there's a reason for that, is because humans operate that way. We connect based on emotions, and we connect. It's the gut feeling, right? So to answer your question, what is the feeling that we want people to have at the end of watching a brand video? You have to decide that for yourself. You have to research that for your own audience. Across the board, I can kind of tell you a few things that apply to all brand videos.
That would be helpful.
One is we want to create that feeling of trust. The know, like, and trust applies to everyone, right? How long that is, how that comes to be is what changes. But ultimately, it's that feeling of trust. So you have to ask and you have to research, what does trust feel like for your audience? What does confidence feel like? What is it, again, what is it about you that makes them trust you versus somebody else who's offering something similar? And then the other things that I mentioned before that are across the board for everyone creating a brand video is you want your audience to feel like, you get them on a very deep level. You are talking to them very specifically. People need to feel that. That's part of the trust. And the second one is that you care, that you're not there just to sell something. You're not there just to make money. You truly care about getting them results, whatever those results may be. Even if that result, sometimes I think about this gal I know who sells really cute little pretzels, and I think it's called Fatty Sundays or something like that. And the pretzels are and I always think, like, how would a brand video work for somebody like that, where it's a product where you have to think about all of these companies that sell products and think McDonald's doesn't sell burgers, they sell happiness, right? Nike doesn't sell shoes, they sell motivation. And so it really is about, what is that feeling that you want to create in people? What are they looking for? People buy based on emotions because they want an emotional experience from this purchase.
I love it. Okay. So first step is really understanding, the stories you want to do and the kind of emotions you want to elicit from, and the needs of your audience. And the second part really is understanding ourselves and what makes us unique. What's the third part of your method?
Yeah. So the third part is intersecting those two, right? Is understanding where all of your potential anecdotes, all of your life stories intersect with that feeling that we want to create in our audience. And so you do that there's a whole framework that I teach in my program. But basically what we were doing is we're story banking, which is we're listing all the possible stories that we think could relate, that we think can create an emotional connection with our audience. And we're really looking for that one or two stories, very few stories. If you have a passion story, it might be, 3 stories. If you have an overcome story, it's basically one story that we're going to tell. And even like what details of those stories are going to create that feeling in your audience. So we're looking for that intersection. That's step 3.
Real quick on story banking. Love the concept. What does it really mean? Help people understand what that means to bank a story.
Well, you're banking different. You're just creating a database, a list of possible stories you could tell. Like, hey, I know. So here's the thing. If you've been telling different stories in your business, again, going back to like coaches, course creators, consultants, entrepreneurs, authors, they're used to doing that because they're the face of their brand. If you are a marketer in a company, maybe you're doing less of that. But either way, there's got to be a time where you've told that story. and or different stories.
Yeah, it
And
could be a founder story too, right? For example.
exactly. And you have to really stay attuned to what has resonated with people. What have people reacted to? So, for example, a client of mine, she has a podcast and she says, like, every single episode, I'm telling a different part of my story. And sometimes when you least expect it, people are responding to a certain part of that story or a certain anecdote or a certain detail, Michael. You know, with Casey, there was a detail which was when she'd wake up in the morning after having 1 or 2 bottles of wine at night. And again, this is a functional, high achieving woman. And yet that was her treat at the end of the day, et cetera, et cetera. You could watch her brand video and find out and really dive in. But when she would wake up in the morning and see the bottles in the recycling bin, that feeling of guilt. And she knew from experience, so this is what makes it easier. When you constantly tell your stories and you know what your audience resonates with the most, those are your indications that you should include that in your brand video. And let's say you've never told your story, then you start doing it or you start testing it with your best clients, right? You say like, hey, I could tell the story about this and this, or I could tell you about this. Which one resonates with you most and why, right? Mm-hmm. Or what part of it? What was it about that story that really connected with you? So ideally, you're really collecting those reactions and those what I call emotional touch points as you're doing your marketing. But if you've been slacking in the storytelling department and you're not really using stories to connect with your audience, first of all, do that immediately. And second of all, if you haven't done that, you're kind of catching up, but you still want to really push forward with having that brand story done, then you can, touch base or connect with your best clients and get that sort of reaction from them.
As I'm thinking while you're talking, I'm thinking, hey, if anybody listening has certain kinds of posts that put out on the social platforms that just got a lot of engagement or triggered a lot of personal messages, right? Like
yeah,
on Instagram or messenger messages or LinkedIn private messages, maybe there's a signal there, right? Maybe that's like a little bit of a signal of that story really connected with people. And you could start, like you said, kind of putting those in the hopper or in the story bank, as you called it, as potential stories that you could tell. Now, you mentioned there's 2 paths to go down, the overcomer story and the passion story. Now, you said with overcome, it's generally one storyline because it's the story of how you've overcome something that you help other people overcome. Like it sounds as if the situation with your client who is dealing with borderline alcoholism, that's an overcoming story, right? Or did she have a passion story?
No, that was an overcome story.
Do you have an example of a passion story client or just so people can understand like how many stories, because you said you might have up to 3 little stories inside of this. So I think it'd be useful for someone to hear what a passion story might sound like, even if we were to free flow one on the fly here.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example was Julia, as I mentioned before, where we really understood. I have a passion story, Michael. Like what I had to do for my story. Here I was, like performing surgery on myself. It took a little while, but I had to look at my story and understand what are the anecdotes that people resonated with. And in my brand video, we're almost done editing it. I found that when I told the story of when I was a little girl and I asked my dad to bug our neighbors and empty out a garden shed, created a little school. I was in 1st grade. I was teaching kindergartners how to read. I was charging them 25 cents. I called it the ultimate low ticket course. All these little, these little bits of that story. So I tell that story, and then I tell the story of how I was in the corporate world. And I think a lot of your listeners are kind of in that as well. And I felt like if not now, when? Right? I was so drawn to entrepreneurship. I knew that I wanted to have my own business. I knew that I wanted to call the shots and decide when to work, how to work, not have to respond to anyone and just build my own thing. And so that's the second story that I tell. And then I pivot to my mission of how I realized I could help all of these entrepreneurs build that personal emotional connection through a brand video. So
I love this. And I just want to deconstruct what I heard you say. First of all, I heard you did a flashback to when you were a child, which is kind of signaling to the world, this is who I am. This is who I have always been. Someone who is very creative and entrepreneurial minded, it sounds like, or whatever that angle is you chose to tell that story about your childhood. Then you shared the story of feeling trapped in even though you were working probably for some brands that people would love to work for, right? You were trapped and you felt like you weren't fulfilled, right? And then you transitioned probably into, now my mission, now that I'm on my own again, which is where I think I was meant to be, is to help other people accomplish the very same thing. I mean, that is a great example of a passion story. Do you recommend going back to childhood stories and nostalgic kind of stuff, or when you're doing a passion story, if it fulfills the mission of the story? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the second part of your question is the one that answers it. It has to fulfill the mission of your story. So a passion story is a little bit trickier than an overcome story. There's less of a formula, if you will. There's less of
Right.
rules that apply to everyone. It really is about looking at each individual story in your story bank and thinking, does this hit home with my audience? That is the most important question you can ask. And pay attention. I'm not asking, is this your favorite story to tell about yourself? I'm not asking, does this give you the feels when you think about the story? It's not about you. Your brand video is 100% about the emotional reaction in your audience when they watch it. And so here, I'll give you an example. I'm working with a student right now in the brand video system whose entire company works with moms, and it's about financial literacy for moms, millionaire baby and building up their finances, right? And so she was story banking with me, and she said, "Oh, I have this really good story of when I was a student and I overcame student debt." And I'm like, "Joanna, will your audience resonate with that? You were talking to moms, and your story is when you were not a mom, right? And it's not about your kid." And
Right.
so it's those kinds of things where that is the story that came to her first, but that is not the story that would resonate the most with her audience. You're looking for, what are they going to listen to and really experience, because we're going to talk about emotional visuals, and it's going to make them feel like, oh my gosh, this is my person. This is the feeling that you want, Michael, right? If we talked about what's the feeling you want to create, we want people to watch that brand video and know without a shadow of a doubt that you are their person. This is the person behind the brand that they want to be loyal to and that they will tell their friends about, whether they're ready to buy immediately or whether they're just like, as soon as I'm ready, you're that person. You've established that through that brand video.
Perfect. Okay. So let's move on to your, just in summary, this intersection is the third part of your process where your needs of your customers and the things you want them to feel intersect with your story, right?
Yep.
And that's where you're going to be crafting your story. Let's get into the next step, which, you kind of hinted at it a little bit, but what comes next?
Well, so next is we're going to take that story. By the way, I'm doing myself a disservice. I love brand videos, and I'll tell you why you should do a brand video. But whatever you decide to do, you could stop there. Tell your story. Use that framework and go and record it to camera and have that, or write it in text and have that. So that said, you can also maximize the impact of that by filming and editing your brand video, right? And editing, we won't go in too much, but filming, what we want to think about is not just B-roll. It's not just visuals for the sake of visuals. So this is where all of my 15 years of expertise comes in, where I really teach my students, my clients, how to think about their story in a way for emotional impact through those visuals. What you want to see are, what are the metaphors? What are the things that are not literal visuals of what you're saying? Your visuals should complement and bring the emotional undertones of your story. And there's something that's really amazing. I mean, we could geek out about what happens in your brain when you tell a story, and like your wavelengths are, you're nodding, you probably know all about that. But there's a really interesting concept too called narrative transportation. And this has happened to you if you've watched a movie and you are completely transported by that story. I remember watching Free Solo in an IMAX theater, which was terrible mistake.
Oh, I did.
Oh
Too.
my gosh,
I
it was the
loved it.
worst.
I
It
loved
was so, it was amazing, but I
Yeah.
was so stressed. I was like on the edge.
Oh yeah, you keep thinking this guy's going to fall. For those
I
that don't know,
know.
free solo is about a guy that climbs up El Capitan, I think, without any ropes.
Exactly. Right. Free climbing. And I was on the edge of my seat literally for the first time in my life. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is where the expression comes from.
Yeah.
And that is narrative. That is the effect that you want to create in your brand video. Now, not everybody has, this insanely emotional story, but this is the impact that you want to try to achieve, in that people are not thinking about how much your product costs, the fact that they're going to be sold to at the end of this. They're not thinking about whether they have the time for it. They're not thinking about anything else. Nothing in that part of their brain that's thinking logically is turned on right now.
So how do we trigger that emotion? What kind of visuals, you know what I mean? Like emote, if for lack of better words.
It's visuals that carry a meaning when in and of themselves. They're not just simply illustrating what you're saying. So, a lot of us work behind a computer. And if your brand video is basically showing you at work, that's pretty boring. What we want to think about are how to overcome challenges. There's a visual that I absolutely love. And I'm actually going to work with a really great, quite famous entrepreneur coming up soon. And this is a visual that we're going to use in her story, which is the idea of swimming in a lake. And the idea that you could be struggling against something. We want to hear you breathe. We want to hear, the splashing of the water, and you're trying to come up for air. And so think about illustrating all of the emotions that she had, or that you had, or that your founder had, in a struggle, but in a completely different scenario, where we're using nature, or we're using the jigsaw puzzle that Julia used, right? Where she didn't want to be outside. She didn't want to film in nature. And I was like, okay, so what are you passionate about? What do you love? She's like, I love jigsaw puzzles. And she said that thinking, well, that's useless, right? I teach people how to podcast. And so it's looking for those things that have meaning beyond the obvious, like the jigsaw puzzle that comes together and it's complicated, and
Love
she's
it.
the guide, right? And so we're thinking about how to illustrate struggle with something that's not fake, not stock imagery, not, me on a computer going.
I mean, I totally love this because I'm about to film, and it'll probably be done by the time this airs, but I'm about to film my third one of these kind of videos similar to what you're talking about. And I tend to go out on hiking trails, and I tend to visually demonstrate the struggle because I'm hiking up, or there's an impasse that I cannot get over. You know what I mean? And I find going in nature is a great example. I love this. All right. So we come up with these awesome visuals, and we're going to film it, edit it, make it really amazing. What do we do with this thing when we have it done?
Yeah, absolutely. This is probably the second question I get asked the most, Michael, because people are like, well, what is it? And then the very next thing is like, where do I use it? How does it work? Where does it go? And the best way to describe it, especially if you're a marketer and your people understand this, is top of funnel. And people need to see this as soon as they connect with you. So we're talking email signature. We're talking pinned on the top of your social media profile. We're talking, if you are the face of your brand, your homepage, your About Me page. A really awesome way to use this that I saw recently was a DM automation. When somebody follows you on Instagram, there's so many ways to approach people. A, you can ignore them. B, you can be like, well, are you in here for the content, or are you in here just looking? I believe that people don't want to be bothered when they've just connected with you. I think a great way to kind of break the ice and get the conversation going is like, hey, thanks so much for the follow. Just wanted to share my story. Here's a link. Boom. That's it. Right? So that's an awesome way. Your welcome sequence. A client of mine started putting GIFs of her brand video embedded into her welcome sequence, and her response rate went through the roof. I had another client who, from using her brand video, she said, we're skipping these 4 or 5 emails before a call now. And people are getting on the call and it feels like they know me already. And that's because she used it in all of these places. So there's 100 different creative ways to use a brand video. Those are the kind of top 5, top 6. And you really want to identify, where are people coming into your universe, and where are the places that you can put the brand video right in front of them, so that it doesn't obscure the reason why they're coming to you in the first place, but it's right there for them to watch. Another place is, typically on a sales page way down below the fold, you'll have a little section which is like about me, about the instructor, or about us, right? Put your brand video there, because you might be getting cold traffic from an ad that's quickly landing on your sales page and they haven't had a chance to watch the brand video yet. Or it might remind people who've watched it already. And all of those emotions. So this is the beauty of it, Michael. All of the emotions that you create when somebody watches your brand video are going to resurface every time they see you. And I almost want to highlight that metaphorically, because it really, the superpower of all of the consistency that you have in showing up every day and posting, and all of the marketing efforts that you have going on already are going to be so much more powerful when people have connected with you top of funnel in that magical moment when they first met you. And this is how we feel about our friends, right? When you get to meet somebody, they don't have to be in your face 24/7 for you to remember who they are, for you to remember how you felt about them when they show up again in your feed.
Mariana Henninger, thank you so much for sharing your insights on how to go about creating a brand video. If people want to connect with you on the socials, what's your preferred platform? And if they want to check out your business and maybe work with you, where do you want to send them?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. I am building a small but mighty presence on Instagram, so you can connect with me there. I'm at Brand Magnetic, one word, at Brand Magnetic. And I've got a few fun things for people. If you're listening to this, you're interested in starting to write your story, I've got a bunch of really helpful resources at brandmagnetic.com/SME. So you can find some fun stuff there to sign up for. And by the way, I write really fun emails. When I sign up for things, the thing that I'm kind of hesitant about is I'm going to get flooded with emails that I don't want. I don't write them that often, and people write me back all the time. People I don't know write me back because I do make them fun and interesting and entertaining. And obviously, you're welcome to unsubscribe.
Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Michael. Talk to you soon.